Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I'm here to share a card for the Coffee Lovers Fall Blog Hop. It runs from September 25th to October 2nd, and to participate you have to make a card with a fall theme and a coffee theme, then link it up over at coffeelovingcardmakers.com, but I'll also be sure to share a link in the video description below. For today's card, I decided to do some masking as that's been a request. I started by stamping the fox from the Cool Buddies from Create a Smile Stamps, and then I stamped the large coffee cup from the Coffee First stamp from Create a Smile Stamps. I know that it's a little unrealistic for the little tiny fox to have such a large cup of coffee, but that's one of the fun of stamping, is that we can do things that are whimsical. And to put the pumpkins also in the scene to bring more of a fall look to it, at first I was just going to stamp them behind the fox, but then I wanted to add some more, and so I just masked off a portion of the coffee cup with a post-it note. Post-it notes are great for masking as well, especially if that's all you have on hand, and in this case of the coffee cup, I didn't even have to trim it to be the size of the coffee cup. I could just lay it along the straight edge, and I was able to use that technique a few times. But when I decided to layer the pumpkins and have one of the pumpkins behind another, I did have to cut a quick mask from the post-it note paper to lay on top of the pumpkin. Once I had a gathering of pumpkins, I completed the scene with some fall leaves. The pumpkins and leaves are from Lawn Fawn, and they pair nicely with the Create a Smile stamps because they both have similar thickness in the lines. And I utilized the masks as well when stamping down the leaves so that it would appear like the leaves are falling behind the whole scene. When you are doing masking, it's important to consider which of the elements you want to be the most forward in the scene. Which element do you want to be sort of standing in front of everything else? And that's what you stamp first. So in this case, since I knew that the main highlight were the fox and then the coffee cup, I stamped the fox first, masked it, then stamped the coffee cup so that everything else would appear behind them and be a little bit less prominent. I have stamped this on a 140-pound canson watercolor paper, and I'm going to be coloring it with Inktense pencils. One of the best things about Inktense pencils is you actually can lay on all of the color all over your scene, and it can sit there, and then you can add water later. So it's a little bit less finicky than some watercolor, as with watercolor you often want to complete an area before letting it dry, as you can get those harsh lines in watercolor, although it can be reactivated. It's also less forgiving, more forgiving than Copic markers, which you have to work with while the paper's still a little bit wet. So you can't lay down marker, wait a while, and lay down the shadows and blend it out. So what I'm doing to start with is laying down all of my color all over my scene. I have 24 set of Inktense pencils, but there were a few colors that I thought were kind of missing from the original set, and I filled it in with some open stock. So if you have a set of Inktense pencils, you can get additional pencils in the open stock, or that means buying a single pencil, and help you sort of fill in those collections. But if you were investing in Inktense pencils for the first time, I might suggest a slightly larger set. There weren't quite enough yellows or oranges in the original set for me, and also I've never found a true teal either, and I do like to use that teal turquoise color a lot. Now that I've laid in all my color, I can get started with the painting. I personally prefer to work with a water brush, and I don't put any water in mine, although putting water in yours would work well. I think that the key is to use small amounts of water rather than using a water cup and dipping a brush into it, because these colors are really strong. They're called Inktense for a reason, because of the intensity of the colors, and they would bleed from one to the other. So if you were coloring with red and then you dipped it in your water and tried to move on to the yellow, some of that red water would affect the yellow areas. So you want to be able to constantly have clean water. One way of achieving that is by using a watercolor brush where you like the flow. I have yet to find one that I really truly love, although the koi water brushes are pretty close. So what I've done is just spray some water onto my craft sheet and pick it up little by little as I go. What you might see me doing is painting onto my hand. The reason that I'm doing this sometimes is because if I pick up too much color, if it's too bright and intense, and I want to blend into a lighter area, I have to wipe the color somewhere. You could just wipe it onto a paper towel, but often because I have I'm having my hand there holding the paper anyway, I just wipe off onto my hand, and it doesn't absorb as much of the water either and dry out my brush as much. So I am basically, when I laid down the color, I laid the color down in the areas that I wanted the darkest and left no color in the areas I wanted the lightest, because the Inktense pencils will pull color out into the lighter area, and so you do not need to add color everywhere unless you want a uniform color in the area. So if you want the whole coffee cup to be the same color green with no shadows, you could lay the green everywhere, but I wanted it to appear a little bit rounded, and so I left the area in the middle white for a highlight. Another thing you can do with Inktense pencils is if you didn't get enough color, you could always pull color from the tip of the pencil. I'm going to do this in some areas where I want it to be a little bit less intense. Because I don't want too much color in the coffee cup lid, I mostly want it to be white. However, if you leave something true white, sometimes it appears flat and it doesn't have as much dimension as the rest of your scene. So I really just want to add in a touch of gray. However, I only have a very dark Inktense gray. And so I'm going to wet my brush and pull just a bit of the color off the tip of the pencil and add it in. This also helps when your paper is wet, because when your paper is wet, you cannot add more pencil, but you can add more color from the tip. So remember not to apply the Inktense pencil to an already wet area. You see there that I flashed my cup of coffee because this was actually originally recorded on Periscope, and so I have been in the original video talking and interacting a lot with the viewers, and I have re-recorded and sped this up because it did take about 40 minutes for me to color this scene, but it wouldn't take me 40 minutes to explain all of the tips, and we're actually just doing a lot of chatting in between. Now, I wanted to add a sky, but I don't want to color the entire scene, and I want to make sure that I can really easily control this color and get a really soft, faded out, blended effect. So instead of adding color directly to the paper, which gets you the most intense color, I am going to do the tip technique that I was just speaking of. Generally, what I'm going to try to do is keep my darkest areas right around the outside of the main scene. So around the coffee cup, the pumpkins, and the fox is going to be the darkness for the shadows. I'm not really worried about the shadows that might be cast by the leaves. Honestly, I'm no artist, and so I don't entirely understand how all the shadows and shading on these pictures should work, but I do know little things that just look good and do make sense, like the critter would cast a natural darkness around it, or drop shadows, and where since the fox is standing in front of the coffee cup, where the fox his shadow is going to drop back onto that coffee cup, and it would create a little bit darker of an edge right where the fox meets the coffee cup, for example. And so I just use little tips like that. In this instance, I chose not to even add some grass because I really wanted to keep it simple, and also since my coffee cup was already green, I thought it would blend out too easily into each other, as I don't have a lot of greens to choose from in the Inktense set that I have. Again, this is obviously not a realistic scene, because you wouldn't see a giant cup of coffee next to a fox and that sort of thing. But, you can create it to be your sort of fantasy scene. And once I have all of that blue blended out, I'm pretty much finished with the card. I'm just going to add a sentiment, trim it out with the stitched panel from Lawn Fawn, and mount it onto a coordinating card base. So I'll just take a Copic marker to create a mat that's in a similar color. For the sentiment, I'm using the W+9 Winter Friends stamp set where it says sending warm birthday wishes. I really like that because I think it can help you tie in a lot of winter sets into birthdays, or in this case fall sets into birthdays, and the warm sentiment goes really well with this coffee cup card. So that is it for my card and video today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more crafting tutorials, including how to color with Inktense pencils or Copic markers, you can subscribe to my channel. Please let me know if you're interested in me continuing to add voiceovers to the previously recorded Periscope videos so I can share them on YouTube as well. And I'll leave you a link to the Fall Coffee Lovers blog hop. Thanks for watching. Bye.